Hello and welcome to Early Childhood Ireland's podcast, which features interviews and discussions on all issues relating to high quality in the early years and school age care sector. In our episodes, we have a range of speakers who are leaders in the areas that matter to Early Childhood Ireland members. This podcast series is proudly supported by Aricus Insurance, which offers a comprehensive range of cover at discounted premiums for both business and personal insurance products. So visit www.aricus.ie for more information. In this next series of Early Childhood Ireland's podcast, we're going to focus on outdoor play. Ashton speaks about the outdoor environment providing a range of developmentally appropriate, challenging, diverse, creative and enriching experiences for all children. In Early Childhood Ireland, we believe that outdoor play is a key way for children's learning and development to be supported and encouraged. We know that fundamental movement skills are so important for children, as these skills are the foundations of so many of the movement skills we need through life. Outdoors is a vital place for these to develop. In May 2022, we in Early Childhood Ireland conducted a survey of our members to undertake a baseline assessment of the outdoor play features in their settings. This survey report will be published shortly, and ahead of publication, I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague Liz Kerrins to discuss some of the findings of this survey and how we're going to use this data to influence policy in relation to quality for children. Liz is Director of Research with Early Childhood Ireland, where she has worked since 2019. She previously led on the Children's Rights Alliance Early Childhood Education and Care programme of work. She's an experienced social researcher, policy analyst and children's advocate. She has worked with the Children's Research Centre, Trinity College, the Society of St Vincent de Paul, the National Office, Dublin Institute of Technology, and with Threshold. She's published research reports, book chapters and journal articles on early childhood policy and services. So Liz, thank you for joining me today to tease out this important work.
And thank you, Maura, for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here.
So, Liz, can you take us through what the research study was about, why we did it, why we thought it was important to do it?
Okay. Well, this research study, which is a quantitative research study, so that means finding information using a survey or a questionnaire, provides the first national data on the physical features of outdoor play spaces in early years settings in Ireland. So the study provides us with baseline data in this area. And just to be clear, the study was not about evaluating the services, our member services. It was more about asking questions in the research, like what kind of design approaches are being created by our members in their settings. What can those design approaches tell us about the kinds of play that are being afforded to children in the settings, and what kind of factors impact on access to the outdoors. So that's really why we undertook a survey of our members, to find out and to satisfy our curiosity around this area. We defined the outdoor play space kind of very specifically in the survey, so that people understood what it was that we were asking, that we all coming from the same place. So our definition of an outdoor play space in an early year setting is the outdoor environment on the premises of the setting that has been specifically designed and designated as a place for play.
And it was to kind of help to deepen our knowledge, I think, about the very bare data that's in the Pobl sector profile. Is that right?
That's absolutely correct, Maura. So as you know, Pobl publish a survey every year, which is a profile of the early years and school age childcare sector in Ireland. And it's a fantastic publication and gives us really important data and information on our sector. And we also know that research is used, that data is used by policymakers to develop policy for our sector. But I suppose there's a gap in the data that's in that publication, which isn't surprising. It can't do everything, can't tell us everything.
Yeah.
But one of the questions that is asked of our members is, if they have a play space on the premises. So the Pobl profile has told us for the last couple of years, for 2021 and 2022, that 97% of settings in Ireland have an outdoor play area on their premises. So that's good. It's very good to know. And
97%
it's
is good.
97%, and it's good for children.
Absolutely.
That is the case. But I suppose, as is the way with research, when you find out one piece of data, it just makes you want to know something else. So I suppose for us, we were wondering, well, what does that actually mean? So I gave a very definite definition, I suppose, of what a play space is for us in this research, and also for us in Early Childhood Ireland, which is about, I suppose, the intentionality of the design of that play space. And we would think about, well, what are the kind of opportunities, the kind of play, exploration and play and physical development that might be afforded to children within those spaces. So those are the kind of questions that we would ask. What is the potential play value for children in the play space? So we hear, I suppose, as well in Early Childhood Ireland, and we read a lot about anecdote, I suppose, about what has been called the rubberization of settings internally, but also externally. So that there's a kind of a view, I suppose, that settings are very maybe are full of purchased play equipment that maybe isn't kind of open-ended play materials and equipment, or that the outdoors is full of rubber surfacing, etc., and that there's a lack of natural features in those settings. That there's a fear somehow of kind of a more natural physical environment, and encouraging all types of play and exploration for children. So we really wanted to, I suppose, just test that and see what a survey might tell us. So we all know, I suppose, this idea of children's the affordances that are presented to children by the physical environment in a setting is really, really important in order to understand the quality of the design and development of that setting. So children learn best in environments that provide meaningful contexts for learning and that are full of a diversity of possibilities, so that children can follow their own interests, which is very much, and Maura, you talked about Ashtar earlier on. So this is about the children being able to follow their interests, to have an environment that is very purposefully and skillfully designed and curated by skilled, confident educators.
Yeah.
So
and that isn't just, that while the very physical kind of gross motory play is important, opportunities to be creative or, kind of sit with an adult and read a book.
Yeah.
So if you want to be able to read outside, you need to have somewhere where you can sit to do that the environment suggests and affords the opportunities. So important, isn't it?
It is so important. And it's interesting, when you look at the research, I suppose, and our members will know this from doing their own investigation and research every day in their practice, that there's, everything that's done indoors can be done outdoors. But I suppose the outdoors affords something special and something unique for children, such as, I suppose, being able to develop those kind of, that kind of gross body movement, be a bit more boisterous, make a bit more noise.
That bit of everything that can be done inside can be done outside is a good starting point.
It is.
But then, that there are things like, hills and planting and mud play and those kinds of things that can't really be done inside.
Yes, exactly, or that are in some way more challenging. So even something like sensorial play with, you just mentioned there about mud, sand, clay, wood, and also that you're encountering, if you're outdoors, you're usually encountering something different. So you're getting new concepts and new vocabulary as well.
Yeah. Not to mention weather and climate.
Not to mention weather and climate. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
So, so how did we? You said it was quantitative. So there was a survey, and then that took place, like we said, in May of last year. So just about a year ago. So what did we find? What were the findings? I know you can't go through everything in kind of half an hour or so.
Yeah.
But some of, I suppose, the kind of standout headline features that we found.
Yeah, so it was an online survey. It was of our members who provide early years services, so that's services to children up to the age of 6 or who have entered primary school. We didn't ask too many questions about school-age childcare because it's a kind of, I suppose, a different age group of children and a different context. So we surveyed them online. and we got 490 surveys back of about 3,180. So just, I suppose, if any members are listening, we just really want you to know how appreciative we are of that. And here, there's nothing more lonely than no one wanted to participate in your research.
Exactly.
So we're delighted with that. In the end, we used about 330 of those surveys. There was various reasons in terms of the quality of data why we didn't use them all. But 330 surveys is a lot of data. And we're still, as you say, there's a lot of data, Maureen, as you say, we're still working our way through it. And just to say, we had every setting got a survey. So obviously there's different services in those settings. So we've got quite a lot of data on different kinds of services. I think what's really interesting about those, 330 members, is that they provided a range of services, okay, from sessional, full day care, part-time, school age, to 14,672 children. So whenever we're talking about the data, and we're talking about numbers and percentages, all I can think is there were 14,672 children whose right to play is being vindicated, and also whose and thinking about design, it doesn't sound like the most exciting thing in the world, but to a child it is, to 14,000 children it is.
And that they're in the care of educators who are thoughtfully considering and developing, and even taking the time. You don't take time to respond to a survey. That doesn't mean anything to you.
You don't, and definitely not the length of our survey. So thank you very, very much, everybody. So, and I suppose just to say that the main point of the survey was about trying to identify the physical characteristics of the setting. So I suppose there's a couple of things there's a lot of interesting things in there, but just first of all, I suppose one of the first interesting findings was that 99% of people who responded had outdoor play spaces in their settings. So like the public statistic. What was really interesting is we asked our members, our early years service provider members, how many of them actually had play spaces when they first started to operate that service, and 79% did, which is good. It's a high percentage. But I think it's interesting just to talk about the 20%, which was about 72 settings, developed their space from nothing. So it's really important to acknowledge that, and what that tells us is that there's huge potential in our membership in relation to the skills and knowledge of our membership, the commitment of our membership to develop those spaces, and also the reflection and observation that they had to I suppose, the professional practice that they had to engage in order to develop those spaces. So that's really interesting and a very optimistic figure, I think, to be starting out on.
And the investment, the financial investment that, because yes, there are some grants available, but, largely this would have, and I suppose COVID would have been a big trigger in terms of the development of some of those.
Yes.
But that's a fascinating figure.
I think a lot of those would be pre-COVID, I would imagine.
Okay.
That we would be pre-COVID. So I think that's really interesting. There is a lot of data, so maybe I'll just pick out a couple of pieces of really, really interesting data that tell us something about the potential affordances for children in terms of their play. So one of the indicators of quality in early childhood services is the extent to which children have direct access to the outdoor environment from the indoor environment, and also the extent to which they have, which I know our members call free flow access to settings, to the outdoors and indoors. So this is really important for children, that they can come and go, I suppose, as they please, as it provides them with autonomy and realises their rights in that way, that they can follow their own interest, which is so important, again, to Aistir and Shilta, and to our whole curriculum approach in Ireland. And then that access, that free flow and open access to the outdoors and indoors again, is an invitation to explore and to be curious. And a closed door really to a child suggests something very different and not very positive. So,
and even that opportunity to kind of self-regulate as children get older, that very often, for all of us, if we're feeling under pressure, heading out and getting a breath of fresh air can really help us to, kind of take a few deep breaths. It's maybe quieter and more tranquil, and that's why, one of the reasons why having that easy access to the outdoors, if at all possible, is very important.
Absolutely. And some children, want that space on their own. They need that, going away with a book, going away with an activity, and concentrating on that activity is really important, which can be hard to do in a busy room. So really important. So it's great to know that 74% of the early years settings provided direct access to children to the outdoors. And very interesting, we asked questions about by different service types. So in a setting, you might have a sessional and a full day care setting, service, and a part-time day service. And it was interesting because they were all around the same. There wasn't a kind of a difference between service types. So it wasn't that sessional provided more direct access and full day care less. That wasn't particularly the case. The other thing that was interesting was that, as you know, in the Public survey, we know that around 70% of the earlier settings in Ireland are operated privately for profit, and about 30 are operated non-for-profit by a community organisation. And it's interesting that in terms of the number of, or the percentage of settings that were providing direct access to the outdoors, 75% of the for-profit were doing so, and 70% of the community settings.
Okay.
So really there wasn't a whole pile. People ask questions about what's the difference, in quality.
Yeah.
So, but the other thing that's interesting, and we would hear a lot from our members, I suppose, about their concerns about where their setting is located and what the impact of that setting location is on the opportunities that they have as service providers to afford really high quality care opportunities to children. So they might say, well, I'm in a really small suburban plot, like what, I can't have the same level of quality as someone who's on a farm or has acres at the back of their setting. And I suppose, what we would always say is that, it's not necessarily about the size of the space. It's about the opportunities that are presented within the space for children. So, and
the frequency that children have to access the space.
Exactly. And that's why access and free flow is so important.
Yeah.
So it was another interesting, 72% of those settings who responded that are in a rural, their setting is in a rural area but close to town. They provided open access. 80% who are just totally in a rural setting did, but those who were close in an urban area close to town, 72% of them did, and in urban areas 71% did.
Okay.
So I know there's a little bit more in rural areas, but it's not
a huge gap.
It's not a huge gap. So now it's good to be very clear about the findings. We're not claiming that the findings are representative of all settings in Ireland, and they're also not representative of all settings who are members of ours. So we can only really talk about
the services that
the services here, Yeah. But all I can tell you is that's 14,000. Again, go back to the number of children and think about that.
Yeah.
So that's very, very important. There was one interesting finding there that does tell us that physical location of the setting does matter. And we ask questions like, are you in a purpose-built setting? Are you in a setting that may be part of a wider group of family services, like a family resource centre? We ask a lot, questions like that. And one of the and are they purpose-built, etc. So one of the interesting findings there was that I suppose one of the issues that does arise is that there's less likely to be open access for children where the setting is located on a primary or secondary school grounds.
Okay.
So that we don't know what's going on there. Again, that just brings more questions to mind for us.
Yeah.
So only 62% who were on
okay.
And we're actually quite a good response rate from those kind of settings. We actually don't have any data. We don't have any information or research in Ireland at all on those kind of settings who are within on school grounds.
Okay.
So and these are the kind of questions, I suppose, that aren't in the Public survey. So it's really kind of unique data that we do have. So that's really, really, really interesting. And then the second area, I suppose, in terms of children being able to follow their interests and have autonomy, is around free movement between the indoors and the outdoors. So while there might be direct access, that doesn't always mean that there's free movement for children. It could be quite theoretical. So we were interested in free movement or free flow. So the numbers, we're starting to see kind of reduction now in the percentages of settings and of services that offer free flow. So we can see that 58%, for instance, of full daycare services offered free flow, 55% of part-time, and the same 58% for sessional. So rural settings located in rural areas were more likely to say they offered free flow. So for instance, 64% of settings in rural areas close to a town offered free flow, 66% were rural, not close to a town, so rural,
very rural,
did offer free flow.
Yeah.
And 59% in urban areas and 43% in suburban areas. So that's something for us now. That's kind of kind of, I suppose, raising a flag for us in thinking about free flow and the extent to which the environment affords children the opportunity to follow their own interest, and is there an invitation, or is there a provocation in the setting to go outside and explore?
Yeah. And of course, I mean, there's staffing levels that can be, in a sessional service, for argument's sake, if you've 22 children and 2 staff, it can be difficult to have free flow.
Yes.
You kind of need the extra adult, which you're not required to have by regulation.
Yes, indeed, it's very.
And then even where the outdoor area is, so there might be direct access, but a lot of it could be around the corner.
Exactly.
So
supervision issues come into play. Exactly.
Yeah. So it's something to aspire to, but can be a bit harder to achieve than direct
true.
access. Yeah,
it's absolutely true, and I think and that's why we're very careful not to say this is an evaluation of our member services, nor is it representative. And the other thing I'm supposed to say is, to really understand this issue, this is a very early study. So to really understand this issue, you'd have to be present in the survey.
Yeah.
And there are studies in other countries where this has happened, where you can actually almost like audit the setting, and then you're observing the children. You're undertaking an observational study of the children, and actually looking at are they actualizing those affordances? Are they able to make the most of them? So just to say that this is, a very, this is not a complete survey. We want our study. We'd like to do more.
And I think it's probably something we'll come back to talk a little bit more about, that it is the beginning of a process rather than a standalone process in itself. Exactly.
But interesting again, on primary schools, only 20%, 28% of those settings who are on the grounds of primary or secondary schools, had free flow. I think that's, sometimes it's about, whatever, if you're on somebody else's premises.
Yes. Yeah.
You're working within that.
There can be
those
restrictions or requirements or whatever.
So but these are all things for policymakers to think about. When they're designing supports, standards, whatever it is they're designing.
Yeah. And then in terms of environmental, kind of features in the environment, did we ask questions about, we've spoken about access and frequency of access and ease of access and so on. When children go out, have we findings on what is there for children to do when they go out, and the spaces they have there?
Yeah. So we asked about transitional spaces, which are becoming more and more of an issue. In the design of I suppose because they are transitioned, they're between the indoors and the outdoors, and they're important for learning.
It was a feature of the Universal Design Guidelines that we worked on a couple of years ago, the provision of a space like that can be used as a changing area. It can be, covered area for sand, water, painting, whatever.
Exactly.
Or shelter or shade. It's great multifunctional space if you have the square footage
if you
to
have
provide it.
Yes, so I mean nearly half did,
that's brilliant.
Now I think we need to look at the data again, because there's other data that tells us that there's other kinds of structures, I mean, I sometimes maybe we ask things like, is there a permanent shelter on the outdoor space, and nearly 58% had a pergola. People had different kinds of outdoor structures. So I suspect that some people maybe are not thinking about them in the way of the transitional. But in terms of the affordances, they are highly transitional.
Yeah,
and
I mean, the transitional space needs to be attached to the building.
It does.
To be a transitional space.
Exactly. So some of those, like a pergola, could very easily be on a.
It could be at the far end of the garden.
Exactly, but it might not be. So there's things that we don't know by not, because we're not physically in the setting. There. So this is very much an indication of where we are. But interestingly, I mean, there's some other structural pieces that are really interesting. 38% of settings had dens. And we know of the importance of dens, again, in terms of that the autonomy and the exploration that are involved. And also 42% had open fencing, so children were visible from the outside. And I know this sounds like, why is she talking about fencing? But I suppose in a lot of the literature, that's seen as being good practice from the point of view of children's visibility.
Yeah.
Children's right to their visibility, and children's right to their visibility in their community. That they're not kind of shuffled off. Out of sight and out of mind.
Behind a high wall.
Behind a high wall.
Yeah.
So I think that's really a positive feature. And as I say, not everybody has the opportunity who can put up their own fence. So I just think it was really interesting to see that. And I suppose in terms of thinking about, you mentioned the Universal Design Guidelines, Maura. We did a lot of research to develop this survey, and we did a lot of literature reviews. We also visited 13 of our member settings of different kinds of settings. So some of them were, in parts of the country that were more rural, and some of them were very urban, because we wanted to, I suppose, see what the reality was on the ground, because that's where you'll get the better questions out of. If you just rely on the literature. Yeah. So we got some, we asked questions we would never have asked if we didn't visit our member settings. And come away with pictures to be looking at and thinking about, and talking to the member to really think about that. And one of the pieces, obviously, we also scoped out of the Universal Design Guidelines, which really are the only guidelines available if to our members and to other providers to design their settings. And one of the I suppose features, the desired features in the UD guidelines, is planting to enable visually impaired children to be independent outside. So 41%
great.
indicated that. So I suppose I'm conscious that there's a lot to be really positive about in this. And we showed this to a colleague who's been working with Early Childhood Ireland for a number of years, and who's had her own setting, and I suppose who's been through the travails of the sector for the last number of decades. And her feeling about so much of what she saw here was very positive, because it reminded her of the progress that has been made. Absolutely. So,
and even though this is a preliminary kind of piece of work as far as we're concerned, I think, given that earlier figure about the number of settings that said that they had developed their outdoor area, even the fact of having questions, that bit you said about scoping out the questions and going to settings and seeing things and including them, that's providing kind of ideas to people who kind of might, tick not yet.
Yes.
But I'm going to do it now.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, we've talked about the findings, and I've mentioned a couple of times that this is kind of a preliminary piece of work. So I suppose, what are the implications, and what do we do next?
What do we do next, and what are the implications? I suppose there's a few different implications. The first thing is, I think, and it's why research, I think, is so important. It's not, obviously it's very important for informing policy, really important. But it's also, there's something about taking a stock and seeing where you are, which is kind of what we wanted to do. We wanted to just know, what does it look like? And we'll go out there again, and we'll ask more questions and find out more and more, and we'll do it in different ways, to find out different pieces of information. to provide a more complete picture. Because as you say, this is very much our first stab at it.
And like with our barometer, it's just fascinating over time. You can ask different questions.
Exactly.
But there's that bit too, isn't there, about asking the same questions?
The same questions, yeah.
Because that's how you see trends and developments, and that, that's what kind of helps you to take stock too.
Exactly. So that's really, really important, to be taking stock like that. And I suppose it's also helps us to look for better data from the state. So it really, I suppose, one of our asks is that that we have better data, be it in the Pubble survey, be it in growing up in Ireland, that we have we've done quite a lot of the kind of the hard work in some ways, on thinking about what might those questions might look like, because we really need to understand what kind of environments children are experiencing. Otherwise it'll be very hard to say whether we're achieving all of our goals. But whoever we are in society, or in the world of policy, or in the world of services, very hard to know if you're achieving your goals if you don't have that kind of data. At a more practical level, I suppose, we are also using the data to inform our submissions and our engagement with policymakers. As many of your members will know, the Department of Children at the moment is reviewing the regulations, the 2016 regulations, to see if they're fit for purpose, and also to make sure, I suppose, we know from a lot of our members that they feel that the current regulations are not always appropriate to the outdoors, that they were developed with the indoors in mind. Only in 2016, but our lives have changed so much. Although our members were saying that before COVID, but anyway, so I suppose they're looking at that at the moment, and I suppose we can use this data to try to say, well, listen, this is maybe what you should think about, to influence those, and to influence whatever kind of supports as well are needed by our members in order to ensure quality for children.
Thanks, Liz. There's so many areas there. I mean, we could have gone down many rabbit holes to explore those findings more. Mentioned about all that data. It's in the form of a report. It's draft at the moment. When will it be available?
It will be available in early May.
Okay.
And it'll be on our website. For those of you who get our weekly e-zine, Early Times Weekly. Just keep. I think the best thing to do is keep an eye on Early Times Weekly. And we'll put a link in a little
and as ever, the social channels.
Exactly. Exactly.
So I mentioned at the start that this is we're doing a series on outdoor play, influenced by this piece of work that we did. So you mentioned about going to settings. Sometimes there's a feeling my area is too small, I can't do much with it. So in future episodes of this series over the coming weeks, we are going to be talking to some early childhood members about their outdoor play spaces. We've plans for quite a small a setting with quite a small outdoor area and one with a much bigger outdoor area. So you can see the range of opportunities, and then we'll also be examining some of the policy aspects more. So Liz, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, delighted, Maura.
And thank you for listening to this episode of Early Childhood Ireland's podcast, which is proudly supported by Aricus Insurance. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and spread the word to your friends and colleagues, and stay tuned for our next episode.